I want you to picture a scenario that is probably going to feel a little too familiar. You are sitting on your couch, mindlessly scrolling through your phone, and you see it happening in real time. A modern digital mob is forming.
Oh yeah, we all know that exact feeling. It's incredibly predictable at this point.
Right. You know the exact anatomy of the event. Yeah. Name starts trending, the screenshots of, like, the offending post or video begin circulating, and the outrage is just palpable.
And the pylon is breathtakingly fast. I mean, it is just brutal.
It really is. And what's wild is that you can physically feel the underlying machinery of the algorithm practically demanding your participation.
Oh, absolutely.
You feel this bizarre, subtle pressure to weigh in, to publicly distance yourself. Like, you have to make your stance known so nobody mistakes you for the person currently in the crosshairs.
Yeah, it's a completely visceral reaction, isn't it? I mean, your heart rate actually ticks up.
Totally.
And that's because, the speed and scale of that public shaming are uniquely digital, but the psychological terror it induces, that's primal.
Oh, for sure. It hits us right in the survival instincts.
Exactly. There is a very specific modern anxiety tied to watching a digital mob form. You're sitting there calculating the social math, wondering if you're supposed to join in the stoning, or, and this is the scary part, terrified that if you don't, the mob might turn its gaze on you next.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because we tend to think of this hyper-judgmental cancel culture dynamic as, a byproduct of the internet age.
Right. We blame Twitter, we blame TikTok, we blame the algorithm.
Exactly. But what if the blueprint for handling this exact situation isn't modern at all?
That is the big question for today.
Yeah, so today we are pulling from a powerful, very short Christian devotion titled The Seat at the Table of the Canceled. And our mission for this deep dive is to extract the wisdom from this framework.
And it's such an interesting framework to dig into.
It is. We want to understand how anyone, and particularly how Christians wanting to actually practice what they preach, can navigate today's culture of public shaming. So we're looking at one profound interaction from the life of Jesus that directly addresses this.
And what's fascinating here is that it's a great lens to use, because while this is rooted in a religious worldview, the sociological dynamic it diagnoses is universal.
Right. You don't have to be religious to see the bad.
Not at all. You do not need to share the theology to see that it perfectly dissects a deeply human flaw. I mean, the mechanics of the mob, the need for an outgroup, the demand for public purity, none of that has changed. The internet just gave us a more efficient way to enforce it.
Exactly. So to really understand the gravity of the solution this devotion proposes, we have to look at the environment of the first century.
Right. We need to set the scene.
Yeah. So we are zeroing in on a specific moment in the book of Mark, chapter 2. Jesus is having dinner at a man named Levi's house, and the text specifically notes that many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him.
And we really need to pause right there.
Yeah, because to a modern ear, tax collector just sounds like a guy who works for the IRS.
Right. Maybe you groan when you see him at a party, but he's not a pariah.
Exactly. But in first century Judea, that is not the vibe at all.
Not even close. It's actually vital that we understand the mechanics of what a tax collector was, or, this whole scene completely loses its teeth.
So what was the reality on the ground back then?
Well, first century Judea was under the crushing military occupation of the Roman Empire. So a Jewish tax collector wasn't just a government employee.
There was something much worse to the locals.
Yeah, they were citizens who had essentially contracted with the occupying military force to extract money from their own neighbors.
So they were actively collaborating with the oppressor.
Right. And the system was entirely legally corrupt. It was called tax farming.
Tax farming? That sounds intense.
It was. Rome would demand a specific quota for a region. Whatever the tax collector could extort on top of that quota through intimidation or brute force, they got to keep as pure profit.
Wow. So they were traitors, and they were state-sanctioned thieves, making themselves incredibly wealthy while their neighbors starved.
Exactly. But the devotion highlights an even deeper layer of social exile, because on top of all the financial abuse, they were considered ritually and spiritually unclean by the religious elite.
And this is where the ancient world crashes into our modern digital reality, right?
Yeah.
Because in that culture, ritual impurity was essentially contagious.
Yes, that's a perfect way to put it. Contagious.
Like, to even associate with a tax collector, to step foot inside their house, let alone sit down and share a meal with them, meant you were voluntarily staining your own reputation.
You were infecting yourself with their impurity.
Right. You didn't just lose a friend, you lost your entire standing in the community. It's basically algorithmic guilt by association. He became canceled by association.
It's the exact same sociological mechanism we see today, just, with different vocabulary. We might have retired the word unclean, substituting it with words like problematic or canceled or toxic.
But the human instinct driving the behavior is identical.
Completely identical. Every human community binds itself together by defining an out-group. We look for a villain because mutually excluding someone makes the in-group feel safer and more unified.
And our modern technology just supercharges that instinct. Think about the mechanics of our platforms. Algorithms reward outrage with dopamine and visibility.
Oh, 100%.
Like if I post a level-headed, nuanced take about a complicated issue, it gets buried.
Nobody sees it.
Right, but if I post a blistering, dunking takedown of the designated villain of the day, my engagement skyrockets. The algorithm loves a villain because a villain creates clear, unnuanced dividing lines.
Which is precisely why the first-century religious elite loved a villain like the tax collector. Pointing at Levi and saying, "Look at that disgusting traitor," was a highly effective way for the religious leaders to signal their own righteousness to the crowd.
It's virtue signaling.
It is virtue signaling in its most ancient form. It proves you belong to the safe, pure majority.
So if the social stakes of associating with someone like Levi were that astronomically high, I mean, literally risking your own social and spiritual exile, why would Jesus willingly walk into that house?
And that is the crux of the whole thing.
This is the radical pivot. We see how the ancient crowd mirrors the modern comment section. But Jesus responds in a way that just shatters the algorithm.
He does. He doesn't just tolerate Levi from a safe, plausible deniability distance.
Right. He actively goes into his house, pulls up a chair, and eats with him.
And we have to remember, in the ancient Near East, sharing a meal wasn't just a casual networking opportunity. It was the ultimate declaration of shared community, acceptance, and fellowship. It meant, I am aligning myself with you.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, because I have to push back here.
Sure, go for it.
I'm putting myself in the shoes of a modern listener, and my alarm bells are ringing. Because in today's world, proximity absolutely does equal endorsement to the mob.
Oh, without a doubt.
Like, if my coworker makes a deeply insensitive joke in the company Slack channel, and the entire office freezes them out, and then I go grab lunch with that coworker.
The office assumes you agree with the joke.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you refuse to publicly condemn someone who has done something genuinely wrong, doesn't the world assume you are endorsing their worst mistake? How do you survive that real-world consequence?
That is the exact tension the devotion wants us to sit in. Because you are right, the immutable rule of both ancient Judea and modern Twitter is that proximity equals endorsement.
Right. If you touch the sick person, you approve of the sickness.
Exactly. But what's fascinating here is the wisdom we can extract from this historical moment. Jesus completely short-circuited that assumption by separating the action from the ontology, the underlying nature of the human being.
Wait, you're going to have to break that down for me. How do you separate those when the person has done serious harm?
By understanding that validating a person's humanity is not the same thing as excusing their behavior. The core thesis of this framework is that loving the canceled does not mean waving away the sin. It means refusing to delete the humanity of the sinner.
Oh, wow. Refusing to delete their humanity.
Yeah, because the world's view is entirely reductive. When someone falls, society basically says they are nothing more than their worst mistake. Their entire complex human identity is collapsed into one failure.
Right, they become a two-dimensional caricature. They become an avatar we can throw digital stones at without feeling guilty.
Precisely. But the Christian framework presented here offers a stark contrast. It assigns an inherent, unerasable value to the person regardless of their actions.
So he's not ignoring what they did.
Not at all. The text doesn't suggest that Jesus was sitting at the table giving Levi a high five for extorting widows. He wasn't endorsing the corruption.
Okay, that makes sense.
He was demonstrating that you cannot heal a sickness by simply locking the sick person outside the city walls and refusing to look at them. He was signaling that withholding basic human fellowship doesn't actually produce genuine justice or repentance.
It just produces isolation and resentment.
Exactly.
And what blows my mind is the sequence of events. Like, Jesus did not wait for Levi to complete a 10-step public restoration plan before he was seen with him.
No, he didn't.
He didn't demand a groveling apology tour. There was no PR-approved Notes app apology posted to the Jerusalem Times before dinner could commence. He just walked right into the mess.
Which is incredibly disruptive to our modern sensibilities. I mean, we
Yeah.
want the groveling. We demand the public execution of the ego before we will even consider extending an ounce of grace.
But why? Why are we so bloodthirsty for that public groveling?
Well, this is where the devotion forces us to look in the mirror, and I'll be honest, it gets deeply uncomfortable.
Yeah, it really does. It outlines a series of what it calls heart checks to diagnose our own motives for participating in the outrage machine. If the ideal model is to walk toward the outcast, why is it our first instinct to run away and start tweeting?
It demands a level of psychological introspection that the internet actively discourages. The first heart check deals with the concept of projection, which the devotion frames as the shadow of the self.
Let me actually read this directly because it hit me right between the eyes.
Go ahead.
It asks, am I so quick to condemn others because I'm afraid that if people saw my hidden sins, I'd be canceled too? I want you, the listener, to genuinely pause and weigh that for a second.
It's a heavy question.
It really is.
Yeah.
I have to admit, when I first processed this, I instantly thought of a time last year when I retweeted a pretty harsh takedown of a public figure. And if I'm being brutally honest with myself, I didn't actually care that deeply about the specific issue.
Right.
I just knew it was a popular stance. And I wanted my followers to know I was on the right side. I was signaling my own virtue.
That is a remarkably honest admission, and it perfectly illustrates the psychological defense mechanism at play. By hyper-focusing our energy on the flaws and the absolute destruction of the outgroup, we create a smokescreen.
A smokescreen for what?
For our own insecurities and moral failures. If the spotlight is glaringly bright on the terrible thing Levi did, no one is looking at the terrible things I have done in private.
It's like we are eagerly throwing stones in the town square just to prove to the surrounding crowd that we don't belong in the stocks ourselves.
That's a perfect analogy. It is entirely rooted in fear. And that fear corrupts our sense of justice, which leads to the second major heart check, the goal of justice.
Right.
It challenges us to ask whether our loud indignation on social media is genuinely about seeking restoration for the victim and the offender, or if it is just a performative act to elevate our own status.
Performative outrage. It is literally the dominant currency of our culture.
It is. Because true justice is incredibly hard work.
It takes time.
Yeah, true justice requires getting your hands dirty in the messy reality of human relationships. It seeks to repair harm and rehabilitate the person who caused it. Performative outrage, on the other hand, is cheap.
It just requires a keyboard.
Exactly. It seeks a public execution to satisfy the crowd's dopamine craving and to momentarily elevate the status of the person holding the gavel. If we strip away the noble veneer we often paint over our anger, we frequently find that our underlying motive is entirely self-serving.
Man, that is a heavy diagnosis.
It really is.
But what I appreciate about this deep dive is that it doesn't just leave us sitting here feeling guilty about our Twitter habits. It transitions into a practical, outward challenge. It moves from theory to the actual neighborhood you live in. The devotion calls this concluding section the bridge.
Right, because abstract empathy is useless if it doesn't change your physical behavior.
Exactly. It challenges you to identify someone in your own life, your own workplace, or your own community who has been cast out.
We all know someone like that.
We do. Maybe it's that coworker who put their foot in their mouth and is now getting the silent treatment in the break room. Maybe it's a family member whose poor choices have made them the subject of holiday gossip. The challenge is asking, how can you offer them a tangible cup of cold water? Or a literal seat at your table this week?
How do you walk toward the fire?
Yeah. How do you do it?
And this is where the devotion leans into its Christian roots to provide the scaffolding for that kind of courage. Because to walk toward the fire, to associate with the canceled, means you're going to take collateral reputational damage.
The mob will definitely look at you sideways.
So how do you find the strength to do it anyway? It offers a closing prayer that serves as an emotional reset.
The first part of that reset is gratitude. It frames it as thanking God for not canceling us when our own worst sins were laid bare.
And logically, that is the exact antidote to that shadow of the self-fear we just talked about.
Right. If you fundamentally believe that you have already been seen at your absolute worst, your deepest, darkest failures, and you were met with forgiveness instead of exile, the fear evaporates.
You don't have to hide anymore.
Exactly. You no longer need to violently perform for the crowd because your worth isn't tied to their approval anymore.
And that realization is what frees you to act, which leads to the specific request for courage in the devotion. asking for a heart that is completely unafraid of public opinion when showing kindness to the broken.
Because, make no mistake, when you pull up a chair next to the outcast, you are breaking the cardinal rule of the social quarantine.
You really are.
And so what does this all mean? That leads to the climactic challenge of this entire framework. The devotion asks for the ability to see people through what it calls the lens of the cross, rather than the lens of a comment section.
I love that imagery.
Me too.
Yeah.
Just imagine how physically different the world looks depending on which lens you are wearing. It challenges us to learn how to hold truth and grace in the same hand. And I want to camp out on this idea of holding truth and grace simultaneously because I think it is the hardest thing in the world to actually do.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is agonizingly difficult because human nature desperately wants to drop one in order to easily carry the other. They feel like opposing forces.
Let's ground this in a real example. Let's say a close friend of yours does something genuinely destructive. Maybe they cheat on their spouse or they embezzle money, something where real, tangible harm has occurred.
Okay.
If I am only holding truth, what does that look like?
Well, if you are only holding truth, you become rigid, punitive, and cold. You become the first-century Pharisee. You look at your friend, state the factual reality of the immense pain they have caused, and you just walk away.
You just cut them off.
Yeah. You declare them permanently toxic, the truth is served, but the human being is abandoned.
Okay, but flip it. What if I am only holding grace? Because in modern culture, we sometimes mistake grace for just being like a pathologically nice enabler.
Exactly. If you only hold grace, you become apathetic to justice. You ignore the real harm that was done to the victim. You sit down with that friend who cheated and you say, hey, don't worry about it. Everybody makes mistakes. You're still a great person.
Right, which is just toxic positivity.
Yes, you end up excusing the behavior to avoid the uncomfortable conflict. You are prioritizing a superficial peace over genuine accountability.
So holding them in the same hand means you refuse to let the tension snap. It means you look that friend in the eye and say, what you did was absolutely terrible and the damage you caused is real. That is the unvarnished truth.
Right.
But in the exact same breath, without skipping a beat, you pull out a chair and say, but I am not going anywhere. You are more than this mistake, and I'm going to sit in this mess with you. That is the grace.
And that tension is the exact environment Jesus created at Levi's table. The truth was glaringly obvious to everyone in the room. Levi was a part of a brutal, corrupt system of extortion. No one was pretending otherwise.
The truth was definitely there.
But the grace was the physical reality that the invitation to the table still stood. By holding both truth and grace simultaneously, you don't drop the reality of the harm just to be nice, and you don't drop the recognition of their humanity just to be right.
It is a radical way to live. So let's briefly recap the journey we've just been on. We started by looking at the visceral, physiological panic of watching a modern digital mob form, and we connected that directly to the ancient streets of Jerusalem.
We saw how the social exile of a first-century tax collector mirrors the exact same algorithms that drive our cancel culture today.
Yeah. And we examined the disruptive nature of walking toward the outcast, refusing the safety of the crowd to validate a person's humanity without excusing their behavior.
We looked in the mirror, acknowledging that our own performative outrage is often just a smokescreen, a projection of our own hidden fears of being canceled ourselves.
And finally, we unpacked the immensely difficult but deeply necessary work of holding truth and grace in the exact same hand, trading the lens of the comment section for the lens of grace.
It is a profound blueprint, and honestly, it provides a roadmap for restructuring our communities away from disposable relationships and toward genuine resilience.
Absolutely.
But there is one final implication here, a lingering thought that builds on everything we've discussed about the order of operations.
Ooh, I love a good lingering thought to chew on. Where does this leave us?
Think about our default setting for dealing with people who have failed. We operate under the strict assumption that a person must be fully fixed, fully repentant, and thoroughly restored before they are allowed anywhere near the table. We use the table, our fellowship, our community, our acceptance, as a reward for good behavior. But if we look closely at the mechanics of this text, Jesus reverses that timeline entirely. He doesn't wait for a 10-step restoration plan to offer the seat.
He leads with the invitation.
Exactly, which raises a radical question for you to ponder this week. What if extending a seat at the table isn't supposed to be the reward for someone's restoration? What if, instead, proximity, fellowship, and the stubborn refusal to delete someone's humanity is the very environment that makes their restoration possible in the first place?
Wow. What if the table is the cure, not the prize? That completely shatters the paradigm of how we treat the problematic or the canceled. If we actually want people to change, if we genuinely care about justice and rehabilitation, the absolute worst thing we can do is leave them alone in the dark, to be defined entirely by their worst moment.
It's a completely different approach.
It really is. Think back to that digital mob we pictured at the start. The speed, the brutality, the intense pressure to distance yourself. Now picture yourself pulling up a chair instead. It is a completely different way to move through the world. Thanks for coming along on this deep dive. Go find someone to invite to the table this week.